श्रीला गुरुदेव की जय, श्रीमन महाप्रभु की जय, श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन की जय, गौर भक्त वृंद की जय, गौर प्रेमानंद हरि बोल, कार्तिक ब्रात की जय. So, I pronounce all of you, and I hope you are having very auspicious closing of Kartik. As I told you, for us in Argentina, Kartik Brat ended yesterday, but in some places it has ended even before, maybe, but for some, at least in Europe, at least in Finland, it is ending today. So we have taken the opportunity to make this last meeting in the context of our series of lectures, Divine Imperfect, the theological implications of the Damodara-lila. So today we will try to share some further thoughts on this. I hope this may be nourishing for your bhajan and devotional project in this life. So as usual, let's make some brief recap first of what we were studying last week before turning to the topics of the present day. So we were speaking, of course, all this in the context of integration, of complexity and transcendence, being synonymous with integration. As we spoke, transcendence is not dismissal, but integration. Our own philosophy speaks about this constantly. Bhed, abhed, dvaita, dvaita. No, not duality, not only unity, but we want the best of the two, the highest, best possible synthesis. Bhed, abhed. So this integration of complexity, we spoke about this in the second lecture, actually, and we connected that in our third meeting with the idea of purpose, of meaning, the important term, how important it is to approach meaning. We quoted Eliot in that connection, approach meaning in order to restore our experiences, how to make the best of our experiences by getting in contact with the meaning inherent in all of them. This idea of purpose being basically our main need as humans, what to speak as transcendentalists. We invoke Viktor Frankl's The Man in Search of Meaning in this connection, very important, interesting treatise, and how this lack of purpose or lack of meaning is actually nowadays our main collective neurosis of the present time in Kali Yuga. And actually everyone needs meaning, and without it, you can no longer live. Someone will find their ultimate meaning in suicide because they were not able to draw meaning on a daily basis. Or some others will take shelter in madness, if you will, as a way of looking for meaning there, intoxication, different realities that actually do not have to do with the ultimate reality that we are interested in. So we need to get in touch with meaning. As we say, we don't need to invent, create some imaginary meaning, but to discover the already present meaning that is there waiting for us. We ourselves are a unit of meaning. So we have to discover our own selves. And of course, when we speak about ourselves, we cannot speak separate from our source, separate from our potential, in connection to our source. In that sense, our life will really turn meaningful when we put ourselves, in other words, under the shelter of bhakti. So this needs to be done in the present moment. We spoke about the ontological density of the present moment. So it's a very important focus point. And we gave the famous example of japa when we are chanting, and sometimes we may be finding no meaning in what we are doing, and our mind will run here and there somewhere else in order to find so-called meaning, when generally it's not deriving too much meaning somewhere else. And we're just escaping sometime from the invitation to be really meaningful in our attempt to connect with Bhagavan in the form of Sri Nam. So the point is, japa is an invitation to be here in the present moment, to embrace the present moment in a meaningful way, to be able to extract purpose in what we are doing. But if we fail to do so, that's why our mind starts to wander here and there. And we should bring it back over and over again. That's our yogic, bhakti yogic discipline. So meaning, artha, in Sanskrit, artha has to do with meaning, something meaningful. Paramartha has to do with the topmost meaningful thing, which is divine love. We are after that as the ultimate goal. And the opposite of this is what we call anartha. So anartha could be basically referred to not finding meaning or projecting a false sense of meaning into the environment. And that thing we may be doing constantly. And for that, the importance of revelation in our tradition. So revelation will reveal to us the inherent meaning of reality and ourselves as part of that reality. And we will try to align ourselves to that revelation and allow to discover that meaning that revelation is pointing to us. And we will develop faith in our tradition on that basis, Shastriya Shraddha. We will have faith on the basis of what revelation is showing to us, on the basis of which type of purpose and meaning revelation is pointing to us. Because if we attempt to contemplate, interpret revelation, reality outside of revelation, instead of seeing artha paramartha, we'll see anartha. So anartha is not only lust and be, greed, it is all that, of course, but basically has to do with avidya, which in this case is not only lack of knowledge, but misapprehension of reality due to, again, projecting a false sense of value, a false sense of meaning and purpose into whatever is happening around me, even Srinam included during my japa. So we need to connect, to transcend this anartha and enter into the realm of real purpose and meaning. And all this is connected with the stage of being a madhyam, adhikari, having nishtha, having well-informed, fixed faith, because it's connected with this idea of Shastriya Shraddha, revelation, seeing things in connection to revelation. That will be always inspiring. The third verse of Sikshastakam shows the result of such a thing. If you approach reality through the lens of revelation and extract meaning from that, eventually you will reach a point where everything is showing such a meaning. Grass, trees, speaking, sharing lessons, and you'll be an eternal student forever, as we know. So it's very important to deal with meaning and try to extract the inherent meaning of whatever comes to us, even if that comes in the form of something undesirable or so-called suffering, especially if it's unavoidable. We spoke about that, unavoidable suffering. We have to take full responsibility for going through that experience, and that we will call heroism. And of course, if suffering comes, we can avoid that, but we don't do that, that will be called masochism. So that's the difference, small difference, but big difference between being a hero and being a masochist, how to properly deal with suffering. And actually, suffering will stop as we start to find meaning to it. No, I mean, something gives us suffering because we are not able to extract some purpose in that. It's not that the situation in itself bestows suffering. We are the one deriving suffering because we are not deriving meaning and purpose. So we also spoke about sattva, like this constant experience of knowledge and happiness and joy. And constant experience of knowledge means constant deriving of meaning, constant deriving of purpose, constant learning, constantly finding purpose in everything, and naturally constant joy coming from that. And it's only sattva, which is the preliminary function regarding transcendence. And of course, if we speak in transcendence, we have this final ultimate converging point in the Lila, Damodara-lila, specifically Krishna Lila, Vraja Lila, which is an eternal play, which is full of spontaneity, full of playfulness, but full of personal commitment. Even though it outwardly seems they're just enjoying, they're fully committed, they're fully ready to give themselves fully in order to draw the highest possible purpose in everything, which is in connection, in this case, to Sri Krishna Braj. So we mentioned for an Uttamadhikari, that person, he, she will be able to extract this in a natural way, to work in this way, in this dynamics naturally. A Kanishta Adhikari will think he, she is doing that, but actually he, she is going through some distorted version of that yet. Some sentimentalism there and so on, fanaticism. And a Madhyam, which we aspire to become, will be struggling in order to accomplish that. Maybe he's aware, she's aware of the necessity of that, sometimes maybe more successful than other times. So it's aware of the necessity of that. So that's an important step. So we need to, again, not only speak about these things, but we need to inhabit these concepts beyond our tradition. No matter if you are Gaudiya or Christian, you need to become a sage, a wise person, a mystic, and it has to do with that. And only then we can reach this second naivete that we spoke before. Krishna-lila being the second naivete, and being a neophyte being the first naivete or innocence. And we need to go through the in-between complex stage, learning from the complexity, integrating whatever comes to us by finding meaning to it, reaching this unified field of paradoxes, but everything can live together. Because if we are not willing to do that, the result will be misrepresentation of our tradition, misapprehension, or varieties of sectarianism, fundamentalism, sahajism, cheap love, not ready to pay the real price, to enter into this Braja-lila, which is, as we mentioned, theologically complex, because there is extreme Aishwarya, extreme Madhurya, but living together in peace and harmony in a bucolic setting. But there is no tension between this so-called opposite, apparent opposite, or we may speak about the creative one, a creative tension. And again, to reach such a plane, we here have to go through complexity, and sometimes complexity may be presented in the form of tattva and siddhanta, are harmonizing and thinking deeply and reaching a new perspective to reach the ultimate realm of bhava. If you want bhava, first you establish the siddhantic ground. And that implies some complexity to enter bhava, to enter lila, Vrindavan, the ultimate, only perfect community, as Guru Maharaj will put, Braj. So some ideas in the way of recap regarding our previous meeting. So let's go to some points that I would like to share today. Hopefully I have time for sharing all of them. There are many, but I hope that further nourishes, again, your practices. So we'll speak again today a little bit about the experience, doubt, imperfection, and so on, how to deal with these issues that I have been speaking about this along the class, but I think it's important, worthy of pounding the post more. And last class I mentioned that maybe you may share some question, I may speak about that, but eventually these topics came and I think they're worthy of sharing. So if there were some questions or topics you would like to further develop, please save them, and eventually we may see how to address them in other meetings, other series, whatever. It's a perfect excuse to continue our Sangha. So let's speak about experience. No? We already spoke about that, but a little bit more. The idea of having an experience, having our own experience. We are individuals. We can have any other one's experience. But interestingly, we belong to a tradition called Raganuga Bhakti. So the very idea of Raganuga means following the experience of someone else. Interestingly, in Sanskrit, the word anubhav is a term for experience. So anubhav, anu means to follow, and bhava means, bhava, the bhava of someone else, emotion, the feelings of. So to follow the bhava of someone else, of course, as Guru Maharaj was saying, in the beginning, imitation of a good thing may be a good thing, but at some point, that imitation has to take some other form, has to mature, has to take some individuality, if you will, some taste of its own. So we are in a tradition, when we are to follow others' experience, but at the same time, we have to have our own experience in the context of following others' experience. That's an interesting point. Now, you get closer to someone like your guru who is having a great experience, and the fact that of being closer to that experience is in itself an experience for us. We are not having our guru's experience, but just getting closer, but we are having the experience of her experience, which is, again, for us, a great experience that will get us closer to her experience. Sorry if I'm repeating the word experience too many times. But we need to know how to deal with the idea of experience. And again, experience doesn't mean just in the context of transcendence, to have a spiritual experience. No? So many times we hear this idea, or we expect that. Oh, I will chant japa, I will go to the kirtan, and I want to have a spiritual experience. But what's a spiritual experience? No? It doesn't necessarily mean to have some specific type of experience. No? Something has to happen externally. But to have, the point is, to have a spiritual experience means to have any experience, but learn from it from a spiritual perspective. Not to have some unique, specific thing going on externally, and that will be a spiritual experience for me. Or only if things happen in this way, that will be a spiritual experience. Now, we already have figured out how things should be happening. That's not an spiritual experience, but actually it's whatever is happening to you being addressed from a spiritual perspective. I always like to invoke Thomas Merton here. He said very nicely once, your salvation begins in the most ordinary moments of your daily life. Like implying those moments that you consider yourself the most ordinary, because I may say most ordinary and you may think, any of you may think something different. You follow. Most ordinary is not only going to the bathroom and passing a stool. You may make your japa an ordinary moment if you do not take care. And that's a very important point, because in our Bhakti movement, actually we are surrounded on a daily basis of extraordinary items, if you will, different moments and things. Kirtan, Prasadam, Sadhu Sangha, Harinam, Darshan, Shastra, so many things that are not from this world, otherworldly items surround our day. But the danger is that we may get accustomed to them. Familiarity breeds contempt, as they say. So we may be surrounded by extraordinary things, but we may start to see them as normal and not as extraordinary as they are, but as ordinary. So when Merton says here, your salvation starts in your most ordinary moment, doesn't necessarily speak about a specific thing, but whatever you consider ordinary. And sometimes you may feel something extraordinary, you may consider it ordinary. So you need to see beyond that ordinariness and find the extraordinary thing there. And your salvation begins there. So again, that has to do with acquiring experience, becoming proficient in your life in this case. Not just going through certain specific situations, but learning from them again. Addressing them from a spiritual perspective. Do not let, again, the ordinary, limited, selfish, narrow-minded perspective affect the extraordinary things around you. Strictly speaking, everything has that potential to present itself in an extraordinary way. But we need, again, to awake to that and to be ready to go through this. Okay, there's a type of complexity here. Let me share you a very nice quote that I read the other day from Richard Rohr, who is a Franciscan monk that I really like a lot. And he says the following. He says, a quiet inner unfolding of things seems to create the most doubt and anxiety for many practitioners. They seem to prefer a touch of the magic wand, kind of God, to a God who works secretly and humbly. The only price we pay for living in the big picture is to hold a bit of doubt and anxiety about the exact how, if, then, where, and who of it all, but never did that. Unfortunately, many of us are not well trained in the art of holding opposites for very long, or living with what could be described as very creative tension. So I really liked this conception that he mentioned here as a further depiction of what we are speaking here. The price we have to pay for living in the big picture. how to deal and hold some doubt, some anxiety about how Krishna will appear in my life, in which way, when, where. I may not have a clue about that. It's not in my control. That's the important point here. I do not control that. I shouldn't try to control that. No, the very idea of projecting meaning into the environment instead of trying to discover the meaning of the environment, it's a way of trying to control reality. No? If I am not too much open to discover, learn from the environment, what's the lesson there, has to do with I'm imposing my already acquired idea of how things should be. Similar to japa. Japa means I will chant. Now I will speak about japa in some minutes, but my point here is we may not be sure how Krishna will come in our life, how he will be, again, as I always mention. We may have an idea, but generally it's much more than that. We have to keep that in mind. Whatever I'm conceiving, that's not the all in all. That's not a fully conclusive thing. So certain doubt may be there still. Regarding how that will happen, in which way, when, not a problem. It shouldn't be a problem. But never we will doubt that. In other words, I know there is someone there on the other side, if you will. I know that's real, and so on. That's the most important thing. And we should be open to this idea. God working in my life in a secret way, in a humble way, like it's being said here. No, not necessarily a magical moment before and after that, but allow him to do his work. No, trusting that's working. Of course, we have to do our part for sure. I always connect this idea of allowing God to work secretly and humbly with what Guru Maharaj said once when they asked him, someone asked him how to chant Srinam. And he said, just try to hear the name. No? Similar to what Prabhupada said, stop thinking for a while chanting. And just, again, the point is, do not try to bestow purpose on the name. Do not try to project meaning of what you are doing, but try, in this case, to allow the purpose and the meaning of the name to reveal itself to you by hearing it attentively. Try to hear what Srinam is telling to you. Try to allow Krishna in the form of the name to work humbly and secretly, if you will, and not just conclude yourself about how this should be happening. In Christian traditions, they have these type of things also. Of course, they do not have that much information about God's form and activities, but they basically say, do not be concerned about try to conceive all those things, but just surrender to how he wants to show himself. And of course, in Gaudiya Vedanta, we are different. There's so much said about God forms, God activities, but at the same time, it's important for us, nonetheless, to culture this surrender, because we may know Krishna's form is this, Krishna's lila is this, but we know that the actual form and actual lila is much more than what we think it is. So we should be open to that upgrading of what we think it may be. Before reaching the realm of Baba, the longing of Baba, first we should have this surrender. However he wants to show himself, that will happen. I should allow that to happen. So, because if not, we will commit the mistake of having already decided how God should appear in my life. And one thing is to have bhava and some real affinity that will inspire Krishna to appear in our lives in a certain way. But another thing is to project our own limitations and not being open for surprise, if you will, in the context of how love moves in a crooked way, and we won't be able to anticipate its next movement and so on. So we should be open. That's the point. Open to and deal with certain doubt. Again, not as Guru Maharaj will say, as we will say, the Guru's role is to create doubt, healthy doubt. Because if not, you have to be careful. If you are too close of those so-called true believers, that they believe so much, quote unquote, of course, that they cannot deal, they cannot carry any doubt, any healthy anxiety regarding, again, all this mysterious aspect of the spirituality, because again, we are trying to love God. That's a very huge project. Has to have to do with infinity, the absolute. So who we are next to that, we are so small, infinitesimal, as you know. Srila Maharaj will say, that you get closer to the infinite. Are you prepared for that? He said. You have to pay a price, and that's you will realize there is no limit for progress here. Everything is constantly evolving. I cannot control anything. I cannot anticipate anything. It's not in my hands. No? So that requires a lot of humility, a lot of surrender. It shouldn't be a neurosis. We should be happily and healthily advancing towards that. But it's a mysterious reality, and we should be ready trying to jump into that unknown realm. Again, holding the hand of those who are already there. That's our good fortune. Because again, if we are not open to that, we will become fanatic. We will be true believers who think so much, believe so much, but they are not able to doubt about anything. So that has to do mainly with the first naivety we spoke about before, where we are not to be a kanishta, to be a beginner. You have a beginner's mind. That's not a problem. At that stage, you will be probably quite fanatic. And when you are in that stage, as a survival method, you will try to eliminate all doubt because your faith is kanishta, which means tender faith. So your faith is actually not very grounded. So you adopt a position where externally it seems you have a lot of faith. You don't give place to any doubt. But actually, that's a survival technique. But again, such a cosmovision, such a worldview is not wisdom yet. Actually, it's a form of fundamentalism that may be healthy as a beginner's mind and eventually will mature in something else. But if you do not change that properly, that won't be healthy at all. So wisdom needs to be invoked as a madhyam, for example. A madhyam will be able to live happily with doubt, with creative tension, with mystery, all the mystery that God represents, all the things that are out of our hand that we don't know. I mean, the things that we know are so little compared to those things that we do not know. We need to enter into this realm and live there forever. Not just sprinkle with some little drops of that and just run to our comfort zone back. So gradually we should develop some taste to enter into that direction. Because that implies to really embrace reality, to know something in full. For example, to know something fully means to also accept that part of that, the part of that which is for us still mysterious, it's still unknowable. It's not only I accept the part that is comfortable for me and I'm sure about that and I know that fully. No, to know something fully means I'm holding that part of it which is still mysterious and unknowable. And if we are speaking about infinity, I mean, we can never fully know that. Krishna himself, it is said that he's always becoming more and more aware of his own beauty and his own inner self. And as Mahaprabhu, he's eternally dedicated to taste the limits of Radha's love, which has no limits. And that's why Gaur-lila is eternal, because there is no limit to that tasting. So Bhagavan himself is just dedicated to that pursuit. And we should do that in our own terms. And again, a great step in that direction is first to realize how small we are, how little things we know, again, in a healthy way, and to do that, to learn to be ignorant, if you will, to learn ignorance. That's it. That takes a lot of learning, if you will. That takes a lot of learning, to learn ignorance. You say in English, ignorance is bliss. So in this sense, we apply, in this particular sense, we could apply this quote here. In Latin, they say, docta ignorantia, like to have a scholarly type of ignorance. Socrates will say that. Now, the only thing I know is that I don't know. I don't know anything, basically, he said. And he knew a lot. But again, those who know a lot are getting closer, as I say, to the infinite and realize there's so much to know. I'm just touching one point in one infinite line. There is no limit to making progress. I'm happy here, but I'm a student forever, basically. And the Guru comes to teach us that. And that's why Guru Maharaj, as I mentioned before, he will say, the role of the Guru is to make you doubt, to create certain uncertainty in this disciple who may think, I already know what's this about. And the Guru will say, you are dealing with infinite, with infinity. How can you dare to say, I know it all? No? I mean, of course, that's your comfort zone. As a Kanista, that's your survival area at certain stage that's needed. But eventually, Guru will take your hand and take you out of that. And let's say, let's take a walk in the unknown. Let's take a walk into the paradoxical realm. That's what it means to Upanishad, to sit at the feet of the Guru and hear, pay close attention. It means he will take you out from your comfort zone, but you will have an incredible journey with him, wherever he may take you, she may take you. He will take you out from this idea of, I know what this is about. I know what Krishna consciousness is about. As much as you advance, you should say that less and less. And again, it seems you are becoming insecure, uncertain, and it seems you are learning less. You don't. And in the beginning, it seems you know everything in the first week, but we know how it really works. So this is the challenge for us. No, if we want to advance, to make progress in our practice, we should be ready to accept. Well, Krishna was not what I thought he was, but not because he was worse, but he was even better. And with everything else, not only Krishna, but whatever I think about, it's like this, it's like this. Do not be attached to conclude, to make a full closing about your conception of things, but always remain open for further enlightenment, further revelation. The question, of course, is, are we willing to do that? Of course, we should ask our question to ourselves on a daily basis. And you will achieve, and maybe one day say yes, and that same day later you find no. I run back to my comfort zone immediately. And eventually you are able to transcend that and you feel, I did it, but you realize I'm still in a comfort zone, but a more subtle one. And in this way you will be making progress rapidly. But this spirit, as we may recall, may term creative doubt, not a depressive doubt, but a doubt that is creative, that is inspiring, that is exciting, will keep us with a perpetual, what we may call beginner's mind. No? Student forever, in the words of Tulasita Maharaj. You will be a guru, but you will feel yourself a disciple. And in this way, no? Keeping always growing, always happy, and always living, always learning. So always learning means always like, how do you say, experiencing what in Sanskrit is called chamatkar. Chamatkar means astonishment, because always something new is coming, every new discovery. No? One stage of prem is anurag, which means Krishna and Radha, for example, they see each other as every time more beautiful than before, and they feel this is the first time I'm meeting you, because I never met such a beautiful boy before, because Krishna was not that beautiful before. And Sri Krishna will think, I never met such a beautiful girl, because Sri Radha's love increased by seeing the increase of Krishna's beauty. So there are new people now, evolved people, to the point of feeling it's first time we're getting each other along. And that creates some chamatkar. They say in Hindi, chamatkari namaskar. Whatever creates chamatkar is worthy of namaskar. Whatever creates this astonishment, which is the very basis of rasa, according to the aestheticians, that is worthy of namaskar, of offering our respect in our whole life. So we as disciples, we should fully identify ourselves as disciples. Discipline has to do with being a disciple. Connect the two words, please. And this is the discipline we are speaking here about. It's not just, as Guru will say, sleep less, eat less. That's not discipline. This is much more discipline. Try to open yourself to remain with a beginner's mind. Never feel yourself a guru, a teacher. Keep growing your humility. And keep living in happy wonder. Happy wonder. Always been like a child, surprised. Christ said the same, if I'm not mistaken. If you want to enter the realm of our Father, you have to be a child. That connection. So we have to keep progressing in this way. We will be mistaken. There will be mistakes still, but we have to keep making higher and higher mistakes. We may term progress like that. What's progress? You will engage in a higher mistake tomorrow than today. And allow that to happen. Allow yourself to be mistaken, and allow to understand that mistake as part of necessary progress. It has to be like that. It has to be like that. Because if you do not, I mean, you have to allow yourself your mistake, as we always spoke, not as an excuse to overindulge in them, but allow to them to happen in order to transcend them, and forgive yourself for being imperfect and for failing, because I mean, we are imperfect and we fail. So if you cannot accept that to begin with, I mean, you stop stuck there. You cannot make any further progress. So if you have forgiven yourself for being imperfect, you have forgiven yourself for being a failure, if you will, on some level, you will be able to do that for everyone, regarding everyone else, everybody else. And of course, if you have not done that homework for yourself, well, the possibilities that you will just pass on your own frustration to others, your own sadness, judgment, all the non-resolved issues. And we know that happens. So we should be very careful to do that, especially when we are in the association of sacred people, the Vaishnavas. So we should allow this to happen. We should be developing a capacity to live with all these ideas. And not only we should allow imperfection, for example, but we should learn how to properly venerate imperfection. That's a very nice, important point. I remember that Guru Maharaj described that once. Someone asked him, what's an arthanibriti? And well, you can give the official definition, like doing away with the undesired, whatever, habits, contamination of the heart. But he said, an arthanibriti means to put your enemies in your altar and worship them. I really like that. Lots of implications. So first he said, put your enemies in the altar. So first, if you put an enemy in the altar, he's no longer your enemy. So you understood what I perceived as enemy, there's my own ghost. There is no enemy there. So not only make your enemy your friend, you put them in your altar and worship them. In other words, your so-called imperfections, in order to put them in the altar, first you have to acknowledge them, to allow yourself to go through them, and then to learn something from them. And when you have integrated that into your life in such a way, the imperfection is no longer imperfection. The enemy is no longer an enemy. It's a friend, it's an attribute, and it's something worthy of being in your altar, of your worship. It's a virtue that will accompany you from now on during the rest of your journey. So that's a challenge. We have to transform imperfection into perfection, into insights, into realizations. And always remember this classical example that many of you may know, called kintsugi, from Eastern tradition. I think it's Japan or maybe China, you will tell me, but something from there, where imperfection is follow this idea. Imperfection is honored, is respected. What's this about? Sometimes some jar in your house, very refined jar, is broken. Generally, we in this side of the world, when something is broken, especially nowadays with everything is so easily dismissible, something is broken, you throw it and you buy something new, perfect, nice. You don't want to deal with broken stuff, imperfection too long. You just throw it as soon as you can and immediately buy something nice, quote unquote. But in this kintsugi tradition, if a jar is broken, they won't throw it. They will fix it, and in all the broken lines, they will pour gold to honor that brokenness, if you will. I don't know if that's the term. To honor the imperfection, to respect that object, and to respect that broken stuff as part of the history of that element, of the experience that is contained there. So that's a pretty big contrast to our modern culture. Again, with anything that is broken or is no longer functioning, or may be exhibiting even the smallest type of imperfection immediately becomes useless. That's in the DNA of postmodern mind. So we should acknowledge that may be there in ourselves, and we have to know how to deal with that, because we ourselves, in so many ways, need to be fixed, if you will, and hopefully with the proper way, honoring that. No? So, but the contrast is there. How to get rid of it as soon as possible. This is broken. This broken stuff is like fire that is burning me. I want to make it disappear as soon as possible. I want to acquire a new perfect product that may replace it with further perfection. That's a superficial comfort zone-like tendency of conditioned soul. But actually, our doctrine is not that at all. Our doctrine is we want to find perfection in imperfection. That's this, in this case, they pour gold in the broken lines. They are like emphasizing the imperfection with gold, because that imperfection is teaching me something. It became gold. It became valuable. So there is there should be perfection in imperfection. And again, as we said, if I'm obsessed with perfection only, we can speak about the imperfection of perfection. Too much perfection, it's a sign. If you want too much perfection, it's a sign of imperfection, most probably. Because again, this is an ongoing affair. Bhaktivinoda Thakur will say in his Bhagavad speech, today's perfection is tomorrow's imperfection. So be ready to change your luggage, to make it new again. So if we follow this line of thought, we will never be too bold, too ready to speak about an idea of absolute perfection, because perfection is something that is in constant movement. In that sense, we may speak in relative terms. It's impossible to fully catch that and retain that forever in one single point, because it's something that is, again, constantly transforming in something else. Perfection, it's mutating into imperfection and a higher degree of perfection, and successively. So that's really an invitation to a life of, again, of progress. Anurag, always for the first time, so we were saying. I remember also this famous painter, Dali, Salvador Dali. As I told you, I think I was connected in the past with some surreal currents of art. And he once said this point, he would say that, do not be afraid of perfection, because sometimes we are afraid of that, afraid that we may not attain that, I will say. So he said, as an artist, progressive one, he said, do not be afraid of perfection, because you will never attain that. No? Another way of making us relax. Do not fear. No? I may not attain imperfection. You will never attain perfection. It's not possible. There's not such a thing as final perfection and no more perfection after this or something. Especially if he was saying that from his view, what to speak from Gaudiya Vedanta lens. So again, a person, and we may be spiritualists, and we may be after perfection, and maybe our search for perfection in the context of saintliness may be just a way of satisfy our ego. That's possible. In the name of being spiritual, I just want to be more perfect than others. I just want to become a saint and to feel myself. My ego will feel, oh, now I'm saint. Now I'm better than the non-saintly ones. So again, this idea is a very subtle line. And Srila Siddhar Maharaj, as you will know, he will say the idea of perfection, the obsession with the idea of perfection comes mainly from a demand from our ego, that from our heart. Our ego is the one who is pushing perfection, 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 because again, that's the language of the times. But our heart can live without perfection. Heart can deal with imperfection. Heart can love and should, with imperfection included. But in this world, in the material realm, so much ego is there. And that's why the material world is so perfectionist. Everything has to be perfect, because that's the demand of the ego again. But in Krishna Lila, that's the realm of the heart. And it seems so imperfect, divine imperfect, because there is so much heart. and there's no ego at all. So it takes the form of so-called imperfection, but the heart there can harmonize everything. Love will harmonize everything, and that's the ultimate meaning of perfection. The heart is in the right place, everything else will be in its right place. Because if we are only obsessed with perfection or so-called perfection, that will be a type of, the background of such mechanism is fear, I would say, fear. We are afraid that if we are not perfect, what will happen to us? Because we have the experience in this world that if you are not perfect, nobody loves you. At least that's what they sell, no? In the publicity world. No? You have to be perfect, you have to look perfect, you have to upload the perfect Instagram picture or whatever the case, in order for you to be someone, in order to be accepted, in order to be loved. And everyone wants to be loved. So one connects this idea, be loved, not being alone, be perfect. And you struggle with that, even though you know at the end, when you are having a dialogue at the end of your day with your pillow at night, you know, I'm not perfect. And I cannot be perfect in one sense. And I need to be loved at the same time. So the point is, the formula is not be perfect so you will be loved someday. That's only fear moving the whole thing. So we need to, and that's conditional love. That's what happens in this world. I love you only if you are perfect. That's basically what everyone says to the other. As long as you are perfect, I love you. So that means nobody loved anyone from the very beginning, from the beginning point. Even though they think that, they say that, I love you, I love you. But if there is the conditioning of as long as you are perfect, or as long as I think you are perfect, I love you, and eventually that fantasy disappears, generally we've seen most of the people do not have the capacity to love anyone because they do not have unconditional love. And we are after unconditional love. Unconditional love means there are no conditions. You may be perfect, you may be imperfect, the latter most probably, but I will love you anyway. We want those people, and those are the sadhus. That's why sadhu sangha is so important, to remove fear. Because in the proximity of the sadhu, we have a glimpse of unconditional love. So when we have unconditional love, we can be freed from this fear, from this concern, this burden of, I have to be perfect in order to be loved. You get close to the sadhu and you realize, oh, I'm being loved while imperfect. He's loving, she's loving me with mistakes included. So that's Vrindavan as well. As Sri Srimas will say again, the absolute is hiding behind a whole curtain of so-called imperfections. So it's very important, this idea of unconditional love. No conditions, no signed contract. You have to do this, only then I will love you. So I need to know me and to know others, again, in the context of unconditional love. That's the only way where we will reach each other, really. Because if not, it will be a paranoia, fear. When we get in touch with unconditional love, allow ourselves, allow others to be what they can be now, and in connection with their potential as well, of course, that will invoke some peace, and we will be quite more relaxed, even with some mistakes that still may be there. But especially, I won't be aware of my mistakes. I will be aware of the affection coming from the other side. If I get close to a sadhu and I'm full of mistakes, but the sadhu is very kind and merciful, that kindness and mercy will totally override whatever imperfection I may have. As I always say, I mean, the mercy of the sadhu is much more powerful. One single real sadhu, that mercy, that shelter is much more potent than all my anarthas put together. That all my imperfections put together in one single point. That's nothing compared to unconditional love. So we need to remain there. Daivim prakritim asritaha. So, and we should learn to appreciate that. Again, go beyond imperfection and reach the affection there. The famous example of the, I think I say, the baby, the child making a drawing for the mother, which aesthetically, professionally speaking, is a disaster in aesthetic consideration, but the mother is just seeing the intention, the affection, and she's crying and crying. And so love is hidden behind this imperfection. So in this way, the mistake, the idea of mistake in itself, it's an irreplaceable aspect of our progress. We want to make progress. Mistake has to be there. Imperfection will be part of that. So learn how to, again, deal with that, live with that. If you want to learn something, you should know you will be mistaken. It's like if you want, I don't know, if you want to play piano and you go to your teacher and say, I would like to play like Mozart, like Beethoven, whatever, but I would like to play like them without having to make any single mistake even once. So the teacher would just laugh and say, you don't have a clue about what does it mean to play like them. You will have to make mistakes for lifetimes, maybe, in order to reach that. Higher and higher mistakes. So that's the same thing. And this is even higher than playing like Mozart. We want to tangle at Brindava, Nityanamada. So we should be very careful that in the name of speaking about spiritual attainment and perfection, sometimes we use the term, no problem. But be very careful of not being promoting a permanent stance of perfection, but actually trying to create a culture of imperfection in the proper context. Again, of course, as I said before, we have to normalize failure. Do not be so neurotic about that. No, so let's try to promote a healthy culture of imperfection, higher and higher imperfection in the context of progress, where the mistakes will be appreciated for their contribution. No, you will give a place to them as a crucial ingredient, constructive ingredient, essential ingredient of learning, in the realm of learning. And that will be much more healthy, much more valid stance than just thinking in terms of that's wrong, that shouldn't be happening, that's bad. Generally, we say those things in connection to those things that are taking us, overwhelming us, taking us outside of our comfort zone, that are inviting us to grow, to give a new step towards unknown lands, but something that is totally necessary for our present situation. So again, Guru and sadhus are lovingly trying to push us with their unconditional love in that direction, and we as disciples, as students, we have our part to do in that sense. We have to open our heart very deeply to this sacred possibility of being mistaken again, to this very valuable chance of engaging in higher and higher mistakes in time. So when someone, going back, trying to make some full circle before finishing, when someone speaks about having experience, we start to speak about experience, having experience in life. Actually, that person generally, if she had real experience, is actually saying, I had made so many mistakes in that particular realm of action. And that took that person to understand certain things and to acquire what we call experience. So that's an important point, at least for me. All those things that, in conclusion, I will say that all those things that we really need in life to incorporate as sadhakas, those things that we really long for, we should be longing for at least, will come to us through the experience of imperfection. Through the experience of engaging in mistakes, but having the sincerity, the integrity, the capacity of recognizing that's happening, accepting that, and learning to solve that, to integrate each new dilemma in a transparent way, in a deep way. We can call that perfection, or we can call that imperfection. It doesn't matter. But without a doubt, those experiences will get us closer and closer of our desired goal, which is the desired goal, this perfect imperfection, or imperfect perfection, or divine imperfection that we find related to Sri Krishna and the Damodara-lila. And this Damodara-lila, which has been present in Kartik, speaks so loudly to us about these fundamental points. Fundamental points. And we should be attracted to that. So let me finish my presentation by sharing some few quotes that I found these days They're very nice and connected to this idea. Hopefully that helps. And of course, if there are any questions, we may have some time after that for that. So there's one quote from the Priti Sandarbha of Jiva Goswami, Anucheda 100, which has to do with the nature of the love of Brajalila. We were speaking here about Brajalila, Damodara-lila, Kartik, and all these ingredients that express them in a particular way, how they should be expressed in our case in order to attain that place. So this verse of Anucheda 100 says, the love the cowherd people feel for Krishna is the crest jewel of all kinds of love. When opposing things suddenly appear, that love does not waver. On the contrary, that love eclipses all opposition. When obstacles arise, that love increases. So I felt this is quite in line with what we are speaking here. Of course, here speaking about the love of the Brajavasis, and we are trying to attain that. But we see what's the nature of that love. Opposing things come, that love is not disappearing, but actually is eclipsing all opposition, which means harmonizing everything, integrating everything. And the love is increasing. So the purpose of the opposition was the increasing of the love. And that's the role of all these personalities in the Lila, like Jatila, Ekutila, as Gurma said yesterday, Chandravali, which may seem to be the bad guys in the movie. They shouldn't be there, but actually the opposition increases love. Srila Maharaj will say, opposition increases harmony. Because some opposing element comes, and a higher level of harmony is required to give a place to that and increase the beauty of the whole thing. And so this is what Vrindavan is about, and this is what we should be about in our attempt to get closer to there. Also, his Prem Samput, very beautiful locklet book by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. One second. In verse 54, he says something similar there. He mentions how, he also describes there how Prem becomes stronger, actually, when it is faced with apparent opposition. So he says, if there are sufferings like Sumeru, like this great mountain, from this world and the next, from relatives, from others, from oneself or one's beloved, Prem, being very strong, quickly conquers them and becomes stronger itself, like a lion nourished, encouraged by the opposition of elephants. So again, great statement, great analogy. Lots of opposition may come from every direction, and of course this ultimately may apply to Sri Radha and Parakiya Bhavu. So much opposition on a daily basis coming from everywhere, relatives and circumstance and society. But again, what's the result of that opposition, or the meaning of that opposition? Prem is increasing. So that was the whole purpose of the so-called obstacles. So if we are sincere, obstacles will never discourage us. If an obstacle is discouraging us, I think we should look more attentively in our own hearts. What I am being not so sincere, not willing to grow, because actually every obstacle is coming for making my love increase, my bhakti increase. And as I say, obstacle is something that I perceive as such. It's not an obstacle by itself, actually. It's something that comes to make us progress. So this analogy is very beautiful here, no? Prem is like a strong lion that is opposed by elephants, but that opposition makes him feel nourished, encouraged, increases the Vira Rasa, if you will. So we should have a taste of this Vira Rasa in the face of difficulties, if you will. We should become heroic, if you will, in this particular context. And finally, I cannot avoid finishing this session by sharing also one beautiful poetry by Govinda Das, which narrates how Srimati Radharani, she diligently prepares for Abhishar. Abhishar means like the dating with Krishna, meeting with Krishna. And thus, what does it mean Shraddha is preparing for Abhishar? She's preparing herself for facing innumerable obstacles again. And she engages in full integration of those obstacles and the full discovery of a content purpose in everything that comes on her way in the form of obstacles. So it's a beautiful poem by Govinda Das. I will just recite the translation in English, and says like this. To prepare herself for walking over the thorny pathways, on the way to the twisting road at night, Radha strews thorns over her yard in the daytime and learns how to tolerate their pricks. She learns how to wrap her ankle bells into her cloth so that she can run at night without making any sound. She throws water over her yard in the daytime to learn how to walk over slippery paths at night. She covers her eyes with her hands in the daytime to learn how to walk in the dark at night. And she rewards a snake charmer with a jeweled bangle for teaching her a mantra that will stifle the snakes that might attack her at night and that will protect her from the attacks of wild beasts of prey. It is as if she's deaf to the words of her superiors, and she simply smiles like a fool when she hears the criticism and rebukes of her relatives. For Shamsundar's sake, she takes even unlimited misery to be like great bliss. Vrindavaneshwari Shri Radha ki jai. So as the saying goes, Madhurena Samapayat, we should end all these undertakings should end in something sweet. So we have shared these beautiful quotes, especially this last one, which shows how the ultimate expression of love, Mahabhav Swarupini, Shri Radha, in the poetry of Govinda Das, she's so willing to embrace obstacles. She's preparing herself. She's entering into the mood to whatever may cross on her way in her attempt to meet Krishna and join Krishna Nag. And she's totally determined. I will go in that direction. Nothing can stop me. And if many things will come, I will prepare myself to know how to deal with all that. And so all this could be taken as a symbolic representation of our own running after Krishna, our particular situation, or on the path we have to go through the dark night of the soul, or through the dark night of entering out of the comfort zone, the land of the unknown, of paradox, and how to integrate complexity. Well, we have to be preparing, we have to be training in our daily life, our sadhana, every single moment, hopefully, is adding to that, is contributing to that. So I hope that this series as well has added to that and contributed to that. So I will put my discourse to rest here. And of course, as usual, if you have any question, any doubt, any comment you may like to share, they are totally more than welcome. Well, here I have one question from Carolina Fesa, which says, could you please remind us about how to deal with the concept of guilt, considering that we have acted according to a state of consciousness at a certain time, and that is what brought us here. Thank you. Well, yes, when we speak about dealing with imperfection and accepting our failures, if you will, of course, this doesn't mean that we will engage in guilt. There may be there's a place for healthy repentance. That's another thing. When we are, as Mahaprabhu says, Durdaiva Midrishami Hajan Anurag, at the end of the second verse. It's so merciful what is coming through the dispensation of Mahaprabhu. So many names, so many Shaktis there, all Shaktis there, so much mercy. But I have no Anurag. I'm not attached to that. So he's lamenting. He's recognizing his lack of taste. There's some healthy repentance, but that's not guilt in the sense of just, guilt generally, as we at least generally understand that, it has to do with still remaining in the center. My ego is there. I am guilt of this. I am guilty. Another thing is to take responsibility for what you have done with full maturity and with full desire of improving yourself. That's another thing. No? You may say, I am guilty of this. It's another way of saying I'm responsible of doing this. Sometimes this semantics may be tricky, if you will. But the idea of guilty in an impractical way, when you're just lamenting, getting discouraged, and your ego remains in the center, I'm the worst of all, and I'm so falling, and this and that. I mean, you can say I'm so falling, but it has to be done in a practical way. You have to walk the talk and show that you want to grow and improve, not just as an excuse to remain in the center, because that can happen as well. No, I'm so falling, I am the most falling. As someone said to Prabhupada, you may know the story. I'm the most falling of all, and Prabhupada said, you are not the most anything. Like implying you want to be the most something. I cannot be the most incredible devotee. Well, let me be at least the most fallen one. So guilt has to do with remaining in the center, not being practical, and not being responsible. That's an important word here. No? This impractical guilt does not imply real commitment and responsibility. So if we recognize, acknowledge some mistakes, some imperfection, something in us, we have to acknowledge that. We have to be committed to our ideal and improve. And that's all, period. We have to continue with our journey. So something like that. So what else? So Annapurna is asking me to share all these quotes that I asked you. Please, better you ask me in private message because I don't have them now. They are different parts of one file here, so I should take some time for doing that. So whoever may like that, they may ask me through private message later. Yes, Omkar, you can. I think nobody has the permission for unmuting themselves. I have put that now, so you can unmute yourself and speak.
Jai Maharaj, Dandavat Pranam. Thank you so much for the class. They've been really nice.
Tell me.
Can you hear me? Because my reception is a little bit bad.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. I have a very a sort of perennial question for myself, and I think a lot of devotees. And in regards of sort of like what you mentioned earlier about sort of Kamal Shraddha, tender faith, and how it's sort of like I guess Ken Wilber calls it translating sort of stage of religion. I think you're referring to when you're talking, or you would be referring to what you were talking about earlier in the beginning of your class, how we sort of sometimes have to go through that tender stage in order for our faith to be strengthened. But it's a very unbecoming stage, and it can also translate a lot of times into just behavior that is very unbecoming toward other Vaishnavas and other faiths. And I seem to be finding myself a lot in this type of relationships with people talking about interfaith, talking about some devotees have dropped off kind of like a bhakti loop, especially where I am at the moment. I'm in a little community with few people aren't devotees so much anymore. They are, but they aren't practicing, so much to the bhakti. And I find myself sort of in a midst of a bit of a tumultuous feelings, which I don't know how to deal with within myself. I find them very, unbecoming, and I want to really go over them to not do sort of autopilot gradation of people's faiths. I want to try and find a way to harmonize that, and I'm sure a lot of people do have that, and I find myself very fortunate that I can detect that sort of tendency to gradate people, and yeah, I don't want to be there in that place. Would you have any idea how to advise somebody to sort of conduct themselves, or is there any way? Do you just have to keep burning yourself in the flames of your own mistakes in in the midst of strengthening your faith? Does that make sense, that question?
Yeah. Well, I think that also Guru Maharaj gave some interesting ideas yesterday in this connection. Tadas made one question yesterday, and he shared some ideas in connection. I don't know if you heard that one, but you are invited to do so in that case. And she spoke about different types of conception and maturity and different types of devotees and fanaticism and weak faith. Well, I won't repeat what he said. You can hear that. But regarding your question, yes, of course, that again, many devotees will have to go, most of the devotees most probably will be neophytes first, unless they have already practiced from previous lifetimes. And in this lifetime, they were born, if you will, as madhyams. That's possibilities there as well, for sure. So I appreciate what you are saying, because you should be happy that you are capable of noticing that. That's something, because for many, that's not noticeable. So the fact that you are able to realize that's going on, and hopefully that's being done in a non-judgmental way. You're not just like condemning anyone, but just objectively appreciating what's going on and how the different levels of adhikar are being played out in different cases. As Guru Maharaj will say yesterday, the problem here is when someone is not willing to do further progress. No? You may be a neophyte, that's not a problem. The problem is when you want to remain a neophyte, when it's time to become something more. Mm-hmm. So that type of association is not healthy. Mm-hmm. And we should be careful of that, especially if we are not that highly situated ourselves. We may be capable to notice the different, and on some level, different degrees of faith, different types of maturity. We may have enough insight to perceive that, but we may not have enough insight to deal with that environment ourselves. And in time, that may start to affect us. And we may require, if we are in such an environment, we may require some distance, physical distance, literally, from that, which I know in nowadays world situation is not so easy to speak of, move from here to there and travel here and there, but sometimes it's required as well. In case we have no sadhu sangha at all, or we may have so-called sadhu sangha, but it's not healthy. In both cases, we should consider some moving. Once I remember one devotee asked that to Guru Maharaj, say, well, I'm in this city, there are no devotees, I'm here because of certain job, but I feel that because of being here and having no sadhu sangha, I'm losing my spiritual life. So Guru Maharaj say, immediately move to some other city where there is sadhu sangha. No? But my work, that's secondary. That's secondary, strictly speaking. Everything is secondary in comparison to sadhu sangha. We should have that list of priority. So if something is damaging, threatening my spiritual standing, that should be my topmost priority. And I should adjust my whole lifetime in that connection. Whether it may be, I don't have sadhu sangha, I need sadhu sangha, or I'm situated in a particular place or situation that there is some sadhu sangha, but it's fanatical, offensive, and how sadhu sangha is that sadhu sangha? And that's damaging for me. So that may happen, and one may need some distance. Of course, if one has enough adhikar, one should be humble enough to recognize how much these shoes are fitting me in my particular situation, and how much can I deal with that and learn from that and help the other ones if they are willing to be helped, and be nourished myself. Because it's not just about insisting in a situation that won't work. It shows itself it's not working now. That may be the lesson I have to learn in that connection. So again, I'm giving a general answer. You have given some specifics of your situation, but of course, still general. There are so many details that one has to deal with. But I will say something like that. Some ideas like this. One should learn how to. If someone is not willing to receive advice, you can insist in that direction. You may try 1, 2, 3 times, but if not, it starts to become offensive, because the person will become offensive, and by you insisting on those persons, you may be part of that, if you will, and that may be one's own tendency to control the situation. I want him to learn, I want him to change, but maybe the lesson is not the right moment for that yet. So be patient, take a distance, pray for that person, remain a well-wisher. That's harder to do than just insisting in trying to make everything changed. We should concentrate in changing ourselves. And as much as we change ourselves, our own example will hopefully move others' heart further. So something like that. I hope that helps. There's one question here from Sakyarati and Shyamananda. So it takes like this. I used to use the argument that one can fall from Golok, then Srila Prabhupada can also fall. This argument comes from Guru Maharaj and is very good because usually those who believe we can fall that have that belief simply because Srila Prabhupada said so and he is infallible. But one time a devotee accepted that the fallibility from the spiritual world also includes Srila Prabhupada. Then I did not know what to say. And this devotee shares similar ideas about accepting imperfections. What will you say in a situation like that? Well, in a situation like that, I will say, no one falls from Vaikuntha, and I will sit with that person and share all the arguments for that. No, because I understand the point you made and what Guru Maharaj said in that connection. Like, okay, in case you may like to think that this may happen to Prabhupada as well. But that's just only one point regarding why we cannot fall from Vaikuntha. So if that's your question, if your question has to do with how to deal with this particular topic, I will say actually, because that's just a device, if you will, that one is using. Well, if he knows all the arguments and he still thinks you fall from Vaikuntha, means conversation is over because there's no conversation at all. I mean, he doesn't know the arguments, with all respect. He thinks he knows, but he has his own idea and he's over. I don't know who he is, of course, or she, but that person has already reached her conclusion. So what to do? I mean, I should repeat the last part of what I say to Ankar. You shouldn't insist in that direction. That person is not ready to learn. It's not ready to something different of what she thinks is the ultimate truth. And maybe have develop a totally distorted idea. Oh, yes, also Prabhupada can fall and imperfection is there. But which type of imperfection in which way? I mean, I hope your conclusion after this series of lectures is not that someone can fall from Vaikuntha, because these series are called Divine Imperfect. It's in a particular way we are saying that in connection to the Golok and what to speak of our particular case here. That's another type of imperfection, and we are trying to separate between the two and how to deal with that. But I mean, there are so many points that have been made. Srila Jiva Goswami, his Bhagavad Sandarbha, I've recently been reading. I think it's Anucheta 63 or something, 64, 66, something there. There's one specific Anucheta called Nobody Falls from Vaikuntha. Nobody even sleeps from Vaikuntha. But speak of falling there, and he gives lots of quotes. So if someone's on the face of that still wants to think something else, again, that's more of an emotional, psychological thing more than a Siddhantic issue. That person is not able to deal with revelation because, why? Because Prabhupada says so, or I don't know what's his main argument, but Prabhupada says so, and that's more like a fanatical, emotional thing that has to do with the Kanishta mentality. So the problem here is you are a Kanishta, you have a Kanishta orientation, and for sure you are not having someone beyond Kanishta guiding you, that you will be obeying, and that's a dangerous thing. Because again, to be a Kanishta is not a problem. The problem is to be a Kanishta and not have a Madhyam or Uttam guiding you, and you being open to being guided by that person, and eventually you will no longer be a Kanishta yourself. If that's not there, and you only say, my Guru is Prabhupada and he's my ultimate authority, in most of those cases, you will remain a Kanishta. Because Prabhupada is not appearing in front of you in your face and saying, you are wrong, you don't fall from Vaikuntha, you should change this and that. And you will be just doing cherry picking of whatever he said in one lecture, in one morning walk, in this book, and create your own conception of what Prabhupada meant. Like this guy recently, someone shared this file that how do you say, like the I don't remember the name, the racing of the Aryan race or something, as the appearance of again, and all this Nazi presentation, and he's a devotee, quote unquote, and he's only compiling quotes from Prabhupada speaking about women, black people, Hitler, or whatever things that in his view, all of them are promoting a Nazi-like orientation to Krishna consciousness. And for him, that's what Prabhupada is about, and Krishna consciousness is about. And the whole book starts with the swastika, and I mean, weird stuff. And this is another example in another direction, but all this speaks about being a Kanishta and not being willing to stop being a Kanishta, being willing to remain in that comfort zone and not having some guidance that can take you out, or maybe the guidance is there, but you are not actually acting as a disciple. So what to do in that case? I mean, you try your best, and if the other person is close, you have to keep up with your bhajan. You have to be attentive to your own case and example. And well, that's all I will say. Hopefully that helps. Omkar says, I got told ISKCON is a self-cleaning entity that has cleaned me out as a dirty thing with my apasiddhanta of nobody false belief. Okay. There are different ideas in ISKCON, although, of course, officially they are saying something and most may be following that. I know the Buddhists who think otherwise, but that there's another problem there, because they may think otherwise, but if they are in the Vyasa-san, they cannot share their opinion, but they have to say what the official version is, and so that's okay. One's own standing may be compromised there, but that's another thing. Each one has to solve that thing in the individual case. So I think we are ready for today. We have already shared quite a few time. So I would like to thank you, all of you, for your invitation, for trying to engage in Harikatha, and for your presence and sincere attention and appreciation. Many of you have written to me privately expressing your inspiration through this series, and actually that is humbling, and that shows your generosity, and that commits me more in trying to serve all of you in the best possible way in my attempt to serve Srila Guru Maharaj. So thank you very much. And I'm, of course, very happy and willing to continue somehow or other with the new series of lectures whenever we may have time. Maybe I will take some days or weeks for finishing some services, local services I have over here. But please, let's remain in touch. And of course, if you have any idea or inspiration or topics you may like that we may be sharing in the next series, I'm open to receiving your suggestions, and let's say what we may come with. So again, thank you very much. Srila Gurudev ki jai, Sriman Mahaprabhu ki jai, Sri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai, Kartik Brat ki jai, Damodara-lila ki jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Gaur Premanand Haribo, Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyaiva cha, Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha, Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda ki jai, Gaur Haribo.